My name's Monika Scarrabelotti and I'm a sculptor. I live in Sydney and partly in Sydney, partly on the south coast, and my work is mostly sort of based around the figure. I think I've always done art for as long as I could remember. I was always drawing and painting, and as a child just always drawing. I grew up without a television, so I guess drawing really occupied a lot of my time, and I always loved storybooks with really beautiful illustrations. So that was my whole childhood, was just looking at pictures and drawing. I have lots of early memories of my grandparents taking me to the art gallery and just being so enchanted by all of the, epic classical pieces, and, just as this little child. So yeah, just always did it. It just always came really naturally to me. And then it wasn't until I was in my 20s that I actually decided to pursue art. It was always more of a hobby. And so I, went to NAS, and I assumed that I would be doing painting. I think many artists go to art school and they think they're going to do painting, and then I just totally fell in love with sculpture. It was just really exciting, and I felt like I was going to learn way more from it. So yeah, that was the path that I decided to follow. Yeah.
Cool.
I think when I started uni, I was really, really fascinated with classically influenced art. I loved, and particularly for sculpture, it was seeing the Bernini's Apollo and Daphne and the Rape of Persephone. These incredible marble sculptures that really got me interested in sculpture. I was always very, very influenced by sort of mythology and folklore, so I loved classical art's engagement with, there's so much of the Greek mythology retold over and over again through those pieces. Now I'm sort of more influenced by, I love just pretty much everything from the 20th century. I find really interesting, because it was just changing and changing. And yeah, my work is obviously very figurative, but I'm starting now. I felt like I got quite obsessive with it. I really felt like I wanted to just nail the figure. But I'm starting to now sort of back away from it again. I think I'm sort of getting more interested in forms for the sake of forms rather than being quite so representational. I think because I'm so interested in sort of storytelling and narrative, and I'm a really, really emotional person, so I'm constantly influenced by those emotions and the stories that are going on around me. So I think the human body is just such a obvious vessel for telling those stories and telling those narratives and conveying those emotions. And because I work with clay mostly when I'm building sculptures, I would sort of zone in on, especially if you're working from a life model, I would sort of think of the human body as a landscape, and just every little crevice and curve and form just becomes really, really seductive. Just trying to capture all of those relationships, between every little concave and convex and all those beautiful rhythms. So yeah, it's funny, when I'm actually modelling the figure, I don't necessarily think of it as a body. It just it breaks down into all those little pieces and all those tiny relationships, Yeah. I think So it totally depends on what I'm feeling, on what I'm inspired by on that day. Often, if there's a narrative, it's more of an emotion than a narrative, maybe. So maybe it's sort of anxiety or melancholy or, you know, something that's like exciting. So I'll just sort of start creating a form from that, and it's almost like if it's a figure anyway, it's almost like the figure gets its own personality and narrative as I'm making it. So I might start off with an idea, but then the end result might be a completely different story. So I sort of feel like most of my works, they definitely have their own personalities, and I can't necessarily articulate what those stories are. It's almost like, you know, when you have a dream and everything makes sense in the dream, and then you try to articulate it and it doesn't make sense at all. So my process is first modelling with the clay, depending on the piece. So some works I make as ceramic sculptures. So I have some works where, I mean, obviously all of these, they're just all ceramic because they're small. I do sort of large scale ceramic works as well, where I'll build it and then cut it up into lots of pieces and hollow it out and then fire it. Which is great because that cuts out the whole making a mould process, which is the other thing that I do, which is, and especially if I need to build something with an armature inside of it. So obviously for a standing figure, you're going to need a structure to hold it up. So in that case, I then, I do a lot of mould making. So I use silicone moulds so that I can reuse them. And then mould making is a really, really labour intensive process. So it takes a lot of time, it's very repetitive. And it's kind of its own craft. So depending on the complexity of the sculpture, you know, the mould could be really simple to just ridiculously complex. But then the beauty of making a mould means that I can cast the same figure over and over again, which has enabled me to experiment with it. I can cast it in fragments, I can cast it in different materials. And I particularly find, being able to experiment with it, because if you've spent, just because the nature of what I do takes so long, you know, if you've spent 80 hours on a piece, you kind of get too scared to really want to experiment with it. But if you can make multiples of it, then you can think, yes, sweet, let's break it, let's rip it apart. I'm still, it's interesting to me. I find abstraction really hard. I think that abstraction is so much harder than figurative. So, you know, maybe I'll get there one day, but at the moment I'm just sort of just feeling my way. I'm really interested in anthropomorphic forms. So I've started reintroducing animal forms into my work. So not necessarily stepping away from the figure entirely, but just stepping away from being quite so literal. I also am really, really passionate about the environment, and I find, you know, a lot of what's happening in the world with climate change and deforestation, I find a lot of that really distressing. So I want to try and start channeling more of that into my work, so that just to give that a voice, and that's something that's sort of always in the back of my mind. And definitely being in nature is probably where I get my most inspiration. It's just where I feel calmest and get all my ideas when I'm out hiking or camping. So I definitely want to channel, see what I can channel from those experiences and see where that goes. And whether that's in sculpture or, you know, back into drawings or, you know, even paintings, which I'd really like to start exploring again. It's been a long time. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's
It's
it.
complete.
Yeah.
Easy. Yeah.
Easy.
Yeah. Easy.
Oh, cool. Yay.
That's great.